Welcome to Series Addict. When we first heard that Westeros would once again open its gates, many of us expected another epic tale of fire, blood, betrayal, and political annihilation. After the towering cultural shadow of Game of Thrones and the operatic intensity of House of the Dragon, expectations were naturally calibrated toward spectacle. Instead, what we received with A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was something surprisingly restrained, intimate, human, and in many ways far braver than another continent-shaking war. This is where the less is more principle truly comes alive. Rather than juggling dozens of noble houses, shifting alliances, and morally ambiguous masterminds, the first season narrows its gaze. The story follows Sir Duncan the Tall, portrayed with quiet sincerity, and his young squire Egg, who is secretly Aegon of House Targaryen, the future Aegon V Targaryen. At its heart, this is not a story about thrones. It's a story about honor, growth, and identity, and that shift in scale changes everything. One of the most refreshing aspects of the season is how manageable it feels. Viewers are not overwhelmed by an avalanche of names, sigils, and genealogies. Instead of needing a mental map of the Seven Kingdoms at all times, we follow a handful of central characters on a relatively contained journey. It makes the world feel less like a chessboard and more like a living, breathing place inhabited by people with flaws, doubts, and small ambitions. This is where the series leans heavily into its Knight's Tale roots. Based on the novellas by George R.R. Martin, the narrative structure resembles a classic chivalric romance. Tournaments replace wars, personal pride replaces geopolitical strategy. Reputation carries as much weight as lineage. The tone feels closer to a medieval road story than to an apocalyptic saga. And remarkably, that smaller scale gives the emotional beats more room to resonate. Sir Duncan the Tall, played with grounded physicality and understated warmth, is perhaps the purest moral center we've seen in this universe in a long time. Unlike many protagonists in Westeros, he is not cunning or politically savvy. He is often outmatched intellectually and socially, yet what he possesses is something rarer in this world: decency. His struggles are not about conquering kingdoms, but about living up to the ideals of knighthood. Watching him navigate tournaments, rivalries, and social hierarchies feels deeply human. Beside him stands Egg, whose dual identity adds layers of tension without ever escalating to continent-level catastrophe. The dynamic between the towering, humble knight and the sharp-disguised prince creates a subtle commentary on power and responsibility. Egg's lineage as a member of House Targaryen could easily have pulled the narrative into familiar territory of destiny and prophecy. Instead, the show keeps the focus intimate. His royal blood is important, yes, but it never overshadows the personal growth unfolding before us. Another strength lies in revisiting noble houses that longtime fans recognize, alongside lesser-known families who finally receive time in the spotlight. Seeing banners we remember from previous stories evokes nostalgia, yet the context is different. This is a calmer Westeros, a generation removed from the catastrophic events we've grown accustomed to. The tension exists, but it simmers rather than explodes. It is fascinating to witness these houses in a period where honor tournaments matter more than existential wars. And crucially, the fate of the realm does not hang in the balance. That alone is revolutionary for this franchise. There is no looming White Walker threat, no imminent civil war threatening to shatter the continent. The conflicts are personal. A bruised ego at a tournament can carry as much narrative weight as a battlefield charge once did. A misunderstanding between knights can escalate into violence without dragging the entire political order with it. The absence of apocalyptic stakes allows the writers to focus on character psychology. We watch Duncan doubt himself. We watch Egg learn humility. We witness pride, insecurity, and youthful recklessness play out in ways that feel grounded rather than mythic. This smaller focus also enhances the pacing. Scenes breathe, conversations linger. Moments of silence are allowed to exist. In a television landscape that often equates speed with excitement, this measured rhythm feels almost rebellious. However, this restrained approach is not without its drawbacks. For viewers conditioned to expect explosive twists and shocking betrayals, the season may feel almost too modest. The narrative rarely shocks. It rarely devastates. Instead, it builds slowly and resolves conflicts in ways that feel classical rather than subversive. Some may interpret this as a lack of ambition. Others may see it as confidence. There are stretches where the tension plateaus, especially mid-season. Without a grand external threat, the show must rely entirely on character-driven drama. And while the writing is solid, not every secondary figure receives enough development to feel fully realized. A few antagonistic knights verge on archetypal rather than layered, which contrasts with the moral complexity we've come to expect from this universe. Still, by the end of the first part of the season's arc, it becomes clear what the creators are attempting: a recalibration. A reminder that Westeros can be a setting for intimate storytelling just as effectively as for operatic tragedy, and in many ways, that recalibration works beautifully. As the season progresses toward its climax, the emotional core strengthens rather than expands. Instead of broadening the map, the story deepens its central relationship. Duncan's internal conflict, his fear of not being worthy of his title, becomes more compelling than any looming war could have been. His physical stature contrasts with his persistent self-doubt, creating a protagonist who feels profoundly relatable despite the medieval setting. Egg's arc also evolves subtly. We see flashes of the ruler he may one day become, not through grand speeches, but through small choices. Acts of empathy. Quiet defiance. Observations about injustice that hint at a reformist mindset. These moments feel earned because they are not framed as destiny unfolding, but as character developing. The tournament sequences deserve special mention. While they lack the massive scale of past battle episodes in the franchise, they are choreographed with intimacy and tension. Armor clashes feel heavy. Injuries matter. Consequences linger. The fights are less about spectacle and more about reputation and survival. In that sense, the show captures the spirit of a traditional knight's romance while grounding it in the gritty realism that defines this world. The production design reinforces this tonal shift. Costumes feel slightly less extravagant than in other installments. Locations, though still impressive, avoid overwhelming grandeur. This visual restraint mirrors the narrative philosophy. Focus on the people, not just the pageantry. That said, there are weaknesses that cannot be ignored. The limited scale occasionally risks monotony. A story built around tournaments and travel can begin to feel repetitive, if not constantly refreshed by strong character beats. While Duncan and Egg remain compelling, some side characters appear briefly and vanish, without leaving lasting impact. In a world so rich with history, this sometimes feels like a missed opportunity. Additionally, the absence of massive political intrigue may disappoint fans who thrive on strategic maneuvering. There are no labyrinthine plots unfolding behind every curtain. The moral conflicts are more straightforward. Honor versus pride, truth versus loyalty, identity versus expectation. For some viewers, this simplicity is refreshing. For others, it may feel like a step back from the intellectual chess matches of earlier series. Yet perhaps that simplicity is precisely the point. In stripping away the constant threat of annihilation, the show invites us to reconsider what truly makes this universe compelling. It isn't only dragons or betrayals. It's the people navigating a harsh world with imperfect tools. It's the small victories, the quiet humiliations, the lessons learned in dusty tourney fields rather than burning cities. There is also something undeniably satisfying about revisiting familiar heraldry and family names without the immediate dread that usually accompanies them. Seeing certain houses in a more stable era allows us to appreciate the continuity of history within this fictional world. It reminds us that not every generation exists at the edge of collapse. By the final episode, the season doesn't conclude with a cataclysm. Instead, it closes on growth, on earned respect, on the understanding that knighthood is not defined solely by skill with a sword, but by moral courage. It's a quieter ending, but one that lingers. Ultimately, the first season proves that Westeros does not need to scream to be heard. Sometimes, a whisper carries just as far. This is a show that trusts its audience to invest in character rather than catastrophe. It may not dominate headlines with shocking deaths or world-altering revelations, but it accomplishes something arguably more difficult. It makes us care deeply about two travelers on a dusty road. And, in a franchise known for excess, that restraint feels almost radical. If you're looking for relentless escalation, you might find yourself restless. But if you're willing to embrace a slower, more human story, one where the fate of the realm isn't at stake every hour, you may discover that this smaller tale leaves a surprisingly large impression. Sometimes, in a world obsessed with bigger and louder, the bravest choice is to go smaller. And here, the less is more philosophy doesn't just function, it thrives. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the first season of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth reviews and long-form discussions about the shows we simply can't stop talking about.